Hello, you're watching Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. Initially released in 2017, FaceApp made a viral comeback in the past weeks. But as thousands and thousands of people around the world use the app to allow artificial intelligence to show them how they would look in old age, privacy concerns also soared. When you boil it down, the outrage was mostly regarding the fact that the app was owned by Russia, who used FaceApp to get access to the user's photo libraries. Now, FaceApp responded and debunked these fears. In a statement released to TechCrunch, it emphasized that while the research and development team of the app is located in Russia, the user data is not transferred to Russia. The statement also said that they only upload photos selected by users to the cloud, no other pictures. Now, as this dust settles on the hype and the confusion, it also gives us, the users of technology, the perfect time to understand how unaware we might be of how apps access our data. What's even more pressing is the matter regarding what happens once apps or tech companies take our data, and how do they use it and for what purpose. On today's episode, we take a deeper look at all this. We welcome to the show Mr. Karner, a technology journalist joining us from Baltimore. We're also joined by Mr. Adam Smith, who is the contributing editor for PC Mag UK. He's joining us from London. Thank you both for joining us. Jennifer, now let me begin with you. I know we discussed the statement given by FaceApp, what it stated, the myths it debunked, but what is the latest on what we know for sure when it comes to FaceApp?
So the thing to remember with FaceApp is that they're right in what they're talking about. So they're only accessing the photos that a user specifically uploads. There's nothing that we've been able to find that would indicate that they can access your entire camera roll. And since the controversy has hit, you can now also email them and you're able to remove your photos from the servers. Now, in the past, they have said that that after a few days, users' photos would be deleted off of the servers, and that the reason that users' photos were initially uploaded to the servers was to give you a faster processing time, so that when you use that aging filter, you're not waiting for 5 minutes to see a result. But the problem is that a user doesn't have direct control over being able to delete their data when they're done with the app.
Right. But Jennifer, just going back to what you stated here, that we know for sure that they can't access the photo library. Isn't it true when you give them permission, they state that they will want access to your photos, and despite the fact whether or not they use the pictures from our photo libraries, they do have access to it?
So the thing to remember is that when you're giving them access, when it says, can I access your photo roll? To begin with, it's not pulling your photo roll as soon as you give them that access. It's just saying that when I'm using my phone, you can see this photo that I'm giving you. But the other thing to remember is that this is no more dangerous than uploading a photo to, say, Facebook. The big difference is just who owns the company, where it's based. So we don't think about it with Facebook because Facebook is an American company, and I'm speaking from personal experience there. But because this is a Russian-owned, Russian-based company, things are a little bit different in terms of privacy concerns.
Right. And I do want to get to that point. Why are things a little bit different just because if it's a Russian-based company? But before that, I want to jump quickly to Adam and ask him about his camera roll and the photo library. When you grant any app access to it, what really happens? I mean, take us through what happens when you click allow and let apps into your phone. What can happen? Because Jennifer stated it's not any different than uploading your picture on Facebook. But phones have sensitive information which could be accessed. Isn't that true?
That is true, but I think it is very clear to make that distinction. So what happens is you'll see a pop-up occur on your phone to give permission for FaceApp or any other app to access your photos. When you do that, it can only access the photo that you upload to FaceApp. In the same way, Facebook only accesses the photo that you upload to Facebook. Now, while there are concerns that, say, a malicious app could go through your phone and take photos that you haven't given it permission for, and that has happened in the past. There's no evidence so far that FaceApp has done anything similar to that, and the company has debunked it numerous times. I think the concern is part of a bigger issue that FaceApp comes from Russia, and there is a lot of talk about Russia at the moment, and people have latched onto that. I know one developer called Joshua Nozzi, I believe, did hypothesize that FaceApp was going in and taking your photos. He has since said that he was wrong, that he mistook the data that he had received. But I think it's from that initial report where people have got the wrong idea, and I think it just shows that we need to be aware and careful of what we give, even what apps we're using, and when we say that an app might have malicious circumstances around it, that we double check and make sure, because otherwise these things can spiral and become a viral hit and not in the good way.
Right. And Jennifer, Adam, about something very important, that there can be malicious apps. FaceApp might not have been one of them, but they do exist. Now, there seems to be a very evident gap between the user's understanding of the terms and conditions and the ones that these apps would put out. I mean, they're long, no one really reads them, maybe they should, but in them somewhere buried would be a terms and conditions which would give consent to this app to access your data. Is that how it works, or is that a misconception?
So that's more or less how it works. So when you look at the privacy policy for any app, it's going to tell you if it takes your data, what data it takes, and how it uses it. So FaceApp in particular actually outlines all of the different data that they use and then how they use it. And the thing is that it's a lot of very vague data. It's nothing very specific or pinpoint. And the problem is that unless you're a user who's savvy to that, when you agree to use the app, you're agreeing to that privacy policy. And so the thing that a lot of users need to start doing is, before they download that new app, they really do need to look at the privacy policy and try to educate themselves on what an app does and whether the trade-off in terms of privacy is worth it for them.
Right. And tell us, how can a user educate themselves in regards to this? I mean, someone who's a layman who isn't that interested in technology or isn't that aware of how these things work. Tell us the risks and the dangers and the ways in which apps can actually access different types of information.
So depending on the app, when you give it access to your phone, when you first download an app, you usually get those permission pop-ups that'll say things like, you're giving it access to your camera roll, or you're giving it access to your phone contacts. And so before you even get to that point, the best thing to do is to look at the privacy policy. You don't need to look at the entire document because it's very, very dense. What you do want to look at is the information we use and the information we collect. And that's usually fairly cut and dry, but it'll tell you, we're going to collect GPS information, or we're going to collect, your phone calls. And then you need to decide whether that's information you want to share. And that's a person-to-person issue. Like, one person might not mind much that, their GPS metadata, which is essentially like your longitudinal and latitudinal location, is shared with an app so that they can try to target you better while someone else would.
Right.
The issue
and Jennifer, just on that point, that's a very interesting point. They can target you better. And Adam, if you were able to pick up on that key phrase there as well that Jennifer stated, if they can target you better when they have your GPS location, when they have access to your contacts. Could you explain that to us as well? Like, what do you think that means?
Well, ultimately, a lot of apps like this, especially free ones, make their money via advertising. And, there's the old adage that if you haven't paid for the app, then you are the product. And simply by having, say, GPS data, which is stored when you take a photo, or maybe the access to data in your contacts, then they will be able to get a better sense of, say, where you are in the world, and therefore pitch you, say, if I'm in London, adverts from companies that would be specific to London. Maybe if my friends have given over some more data from their end and I'm connected to them, then other companies can collate all that data and get a greater sense of who I am as a person, and then therefore simply give me more specific ads that make me more likely to buy things.
For my viewers as well, when you say that apps are free, the person becomes the product. So the aim is actually to get as much as information as you can on that person?
Yes, that would be correct. Data is incredibly valuable at the moment. And if there is no other way of that you see money working, then it means that whatever you're looking at, whatever you're using, is being monetized in some way. For example, for Facebook serving you ads, you don't pay to go on Facebook, but advertisements and promoted content comes up, and that is how Facebook is making money, among other ways, through its products.
Right. And Jennifer, following from everything, that data is incredibly important in this day and age. Let's go back to something you touched upon earlier, which was that the controversy and the hype about FaceApp was probably more regarding the fact that it was Russian-owned. Even though FaceApp said that it does not give its data to Russia, it has its research and development team situated there. But what does that mean if Russia does have, even in a hypothetical situation, influence over FaceApp and it can take data from FaceApp?
So to begin with, it's getting the data that we've handed over, so it would have access to anything that was left on the server. So to begin with, this is assuming that FaceApp isn't deleting users' photos back off of the server a few days after they're used, which they had already said that they did. But the question is, we don't really know how Russia would use that data. Like, we've already seen that data can do a great many things. It's how people target elections. It's how we decide what to buy. Like, you can do anything with data if you have a large enough set to work off of. And so I believe the concern, especially for a lot of Americans, is that, Russia and the United States are not on great terms right now. And so we don't know what way that data is going to be used against us. And that's the concern. And the bigger question is how we allow our data to be distributed. Like, do you want your personal information to go to anyone, or do you want to protect yourself more? And what it really comes down to is sort of knowing what you're getting into before you start to jump on the latest trend just because it looks fun or it's got a cool filter for you to play with.
Right. And I understand the apprehensions on the parts of the Americans, at least. I mean, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, I mean, the fear has just been building up even more and more regarding what can happen if a foreign nation has your data. But when it comes to the collection of information and spreading it out, is it true that nationalities and borders might not even matter? I mean, is it possible that American companies that take your information could send them off to other countries?
So it's technically possible. That's not really something that we've seen happening right now. And a lot of the time, the way that your data is being used. So the truth of the matter is that Cambridge Analytica was terrifying. It's an outlier. It's far more likely that your information is going to be used to sell you a great new computer than it is.
So Facebook is situated, a Silicon Valley company situated in America. Through it, Cambridge Analytica pulled the strings, got what it wanted. Wasn't that an example of how a foreign country could use data from the U.S. while a U.S. company was complicit in it?
Yes, you're right. My apologies on that. So the issue is partially that in a lot of ways, these tech companies have grown in leaps and bounds over the last 10 years, and no government has managed to catch up with them yet. So we don't have the regulations in place to deal with these things the way that they should be dealt with. And more to the point is that a lot of government officials don't really understand what they're looking at, which is something we saw again in the United States when there were the hearings and they brought Marks out, and we had senators who didn't even understand how money was made off of Facebook. So until we understand how data is being used, both as personal entities and as governments, we're not going to be able to control our data or the spread of it across the world or across borders.
Right. And on that point, I would like Adam's take on it as well. How important do you think borders are, nationalities are, when it comes to exporting, importing data, spreading it over to the world, sharing it with companies of interest? How important do you think these borders remain in that case?
I think borders are still very important when it comes to separating out data. For example, there are differences between the Chinese internet, the UK internet, the American internet, and, say, the Turkish internet, for example, based on what you can see, what content can or cannot be posted, the different legislations that do or do not affect what data and what speech, perhaps, can be put on. Now, I don't think those borders are going to negate themselves. If anything, I think they're going to become stronger as the years go on. But I think it's still important to know exactly what those regulations are in each country, and exactly how multinational and international corporations are doing with that data and how it gets moved from one country to another. I think those are things that both lawmakers and people in general aren't exactly au fait about, don't have much knowledge about, but I think it's something that people will need to know about, especially in the coming years.
Right. And do you think with the knowledge that's building up, knowing how important this information is, countries and governments are more and more protective of their citizens' data? I mean, what could the reason behind that be?
Well, I suppose that depends what you mean by protective. For example, in the UK, we're trying to put out what's called an online harms white paper, which is regulation that will essentially, quote unquote, protect people online. So it's it's content filtering, it's putting blockers on pornography websites. Now, some people will argue that is a protection from users and protection against certain content being put across. Other people will say it's a violation of certain civil liberties, and it's a violation of a sort of utopian freedom that the internet was built on. It's very that's a debate that can be had, but that's very separate from essentially where a company's data servers are, which is what people were concerned about with regards to FaceApp.
Right. And taking the conversation forward, Jennifer, I want to now, one of the conversations that was coming up when it came to FaceApp, and not just FaceApp, but any app that allows your pictures to go, is the connection to facial recognition and the archives that will be created in regards to facial recognition. I mean, to a layman, that just sounds like a dystopian universe out there where every camera knows who you are, what it means. But in reality, how close is the world to that sort of a system of facial recognition?
So we're moving closer to full facial recognition every day. You see it in sometimes when a new phone comes out, it'll have a facial recognition way to unlock your phone, which is a biometric lock. It's a lot of things on the news about police stations, especially in the United States again, trying to use facial recognition to look for people. It's a little bit up in the air, especially because there isn't a lot of legislation about it. So we don't really know exactly how close we are, because it depends on those private companies and how lucrative it is for them. The thing to remember is that nobody's going to go after facial recognition unless they're going to make money off of it, because that's the point, right? So it's very much just keeping an eye on private companies to see which ones are going to take stock in facial recognition.
But is it just private companies now? Because facial recognition, when we hear, for example, and Adam would tell us better about this, cases such as London, there are so many CCTV cameras out there, surveillance systems are becoming more and more sophisticated. It seems like the greatest investment in this technology would be by governments and not private companies. Is that true, Adam?
That is true, and in the UK especially, our current Home Secretary has backed facial recognition trials used by the Met, which are in fact not as accurate as I feel they need to be, and as many privacy critics have said that they need to be. Picking out, say, 5 people who are on a criminal watch list out of 50 that have been selected incorrectly. So these innocent people sort of being picked out to go and spoken to by the police. Now, in terms of government in the UK as well, other MPs have also said these trials should stop. Now, in terms of companies training that. We've seen people from like Microsoft and Amazon both taking down their own facial recognition trials because of inaccuracies, and it is possible that more data like that, which gets given through apps like these, could theoretically be used to train facial recognition. However, in the case of FaceApp, I doubt this is happening. We had the same controversy a few years earlier with 10-year challenge of people putting over photos of themselves 10 years before and a current photo now, and people have the same concerns. Is this being used to train an algorithm?
But Adam, here's my question. Now, it seems that we, the consumers, the people at home who use these apps, who use these platforms, always want to give them the benefit of the doubt. No, this is just a challenge. It's been engineered by people, users. There is no back motive. There's no ulterior motive. But then we do see scandals, we do see big breaches, and then it opens our eyes to this completely different world where this data is used and does manipulate elections and so much more that happens. Then everything seems to needs to be evaluated through a more critical lens. So now, is this paranoia too much, you would say, or do you think it's warranted?
I think the criticism is warranted, but we need to use it like a scalpel rather than a hammer. So, for example, many large companies have things like your email address, your name, maybe your location, all of that stored in servers, and those servers will get breached, and that's what hackers are looking for, because that information is much more valuable than, say, for example, a picture of your face that may have been, manipulated to look old. I think if you're ever installing a new app or using a new bit of software, it is laudable and it is encouraged that you should be critical of whatever you're using. You should go and do the research. You should make sure it's safe. But when you see large viral criticisms such as these happening without the backing of media or without respective backing from researchers, it's always worth taking with a pinch of salt and going and trying to find out yourself. Paranoia, it's not paranoia, it is vital criticism that needs to be done, but it needs to be done continuously, and we need to make sure we're criticizing the right things.
Fair enough. I take your point there. And Jennifer, is that you would agree with as well?
Yeah, it really is, what's happened with FaceApp is a perfect example of that, is because the only reason that FaceApp is garnering so much criticism is really because of where it's based. It's really not based on what it's done, which, there were a variety of different researchers who sort of delved into the back end to make sure that nothing untoward was going on. And there wasn't anything untoward going on, anything more than we see with a variety of different apps. But because of where the company is based, it's staying in the news, and that's something to remember.
Right. Of course, there are political motives behind why such elaborate narratives are created, why something is hyped up. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and that's a very important point that you, Jennifer, and Adam both have stated. But now, when we're talking about faces and we're talking about pictures, I do want to touch upon another issue, which is of deepfake, something that has also created a lot of hysteria, that's also created a lot of confusion. People don't really know what that is, and yet they fear it. Jennifer, if you could take us through what this means, it exactly is.
So a deepfake is essentially when someone's face or likeness is used on a body that is not theirs. So you see these a lot with like celebrities right now are really popular, where you'll see a popular female movie star who suddenly is in an X-rated film, and then we find out that it's someone else's body with her face essentially pasted onto it. And in years past, this wasn't really possible because the technology wasn't there, and now we have the ability to do this. And so it's quite scary for a lot of women in particular, because of the ability for someone to throw their face onto a body that isn't theirs and implicate them in something that they've never done.
And Jennifer, do you think with all of these new progressions, the legislation is keeping up with it? I mean, cyber laws that might find proof that this was actually not, in fact, someone's body or something that could be reported. Legislation is keeping up with this?
I really don't. And so part of that is because a lot of our lawmakers tend to be a bit older, and this is technology that, not even millennials are up on anymore. It's really a lot more of the newest generation, that 18 to 25-year-old is going to know a lot more about it than someone who is in their 40s or 50s is, just because they're going to be more tagged into that technology.
I completely get what you're saying. I mean, after watching Mark Zuckerberg in the Congress with all these senators asking him questions that didn't really make sense, I mean, your point is completely validated there.
Yeah, it was, as an American who uses a lot of technology and understands what's going on, it was embarrassing, honestly, to see senators asking how Facebook makes money when everyone knows, that's why there are ads covering Facebook. That's how they're making their money. And so until we have legislators who understand the internet and the technology that's being used, we're never going to have laws that keep up with it. You have both sides to deal with it appropriately.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Karner, for joining us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to have another tech story for you. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Now, in other tech news, Instagram has launched a test of removing likes from user profiles. This initial trial was first launched in Canada during late April, but it's now extended to 6 other countries, which include Australia, Italy, Ireland, Japan, Brazil, New Zealand. The reason for this change, according to Instagram, is we want your followers to focus on what you share, not how many likes your posts get. End quote. But what happens when these likes, which are arguably the main tool for measuring engagement, are taken away? What really is the power and psychology behind likes, and how impactful is it in the social media realm? Let's find out more. Now we're joined by Carl Zah, who's a social media expert. He's joining us from Bali. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the show, Mr. Zah. Carl, take us through this. Now, Instagram taking away this feature for a couple of countries. What impact do you think this will have?
Oh, it has a huge impact because a lot of the so-called social influencers on Instagram, they make their living by working with advertisers to insert ads into their Instagram feed. And one of the main metrics for the advertisers is to look at the number of likes these influencers receive on their Instagram post. So once Instagram removes the like system, it will be very hard for the advertisers to find out whether, say, an influencer has a very engaging post or has an active following.
Right. Adam, on that point, that Carl talked about how this would impact advertising, whether or not the influencers will have a great engagement or not. Advertising companies would measure that. But when we go back to what Instagram stated as being the reason for why they took away this feature, do you think there's something more to than the fact that they just want people to focus on their content and not the likes they're getting?
I think Instagram does want people to focus on their content, but I would actually disagree slightly with what was just said. Instead of Instagram getting rid of likes completely, what is actually happening is Instagram is not making it visible that you can see exactly how many people have liked another photo. So if I'm looking at, say, an Instagram from Indus News, it would say Adam Smith and other people have liked this photo. But Indus News and an influencer would still see exactly how many people have liked that photo. And that information through brand metrics tools gets passed on to advertisers all the same. So they still get that information on who's liking photos, as does the person that's uploaded the content. I think Instagram is trying to change in order to deal with things like mental health, and in order to get people to think about what they're posting separate from, say, gaming an algorithm, or trying to appeal to their audience and try and get a more authentic experience for it. And that is laudable. But to say that they're completely getting rid of likes and that's going to completely change the game of Instagram is slightly misleading. It may look that way from an outside perspective, but behind the scenes on Instagram's base, what it's built on, it remains very similar to what it is currently.
Right. Title from an article published in Vox, which stated Instagram quantified our popularity and now it wants to fix it. Now, let's just go through this tool, this feature of likes, and how it almost revolutionized the social media landscape. I mean, when Facebook first introduced it, it became this very, very important measure to see how popular you are, whether or not what you say resonates with other people. Tell us how much of everything that happens in social media is based on that.
Across all social media, especially for the past few years, likes have indeed dominated. And it's not just likes specifically, but I'd say quantifiable metrics. For example, Twitter followers or retweets, that sort of thing. We as human beings really like ticking clocks. We really like watching numbers go up. It's very satisfying. It does release those bursts of dopamine, but again, that can be very damaging to your mental health if you're just looking for arbitrary numbers to go up, especially in a world when likes and engagements can be so easily purchased and give the impression that perhaps you are more popular than you are not, or perhaps something else is more popular than it isn't. They've been they've been the foundation of some of the largest tech platforms that exist today. And that's not to say that companies haven't tried to get rid of them. Another app called Visco hasn't had likes on it for ages, and it's been doing very well, and it has created a very different kind of ecosystem. But it is safe to say that likes have been underlying a lot of
Adam, hold on to that. I do want to Carl's take on this too. How important is this as a yardstick? Is this as a measure of various things, of likability, if you want to call it that, popularity? How important has this feature become in the social media world?
Oh, it's huge. Because like Adam said, this is it's part of the human psychology, because we are social animals, and to see that like and to see the number of retweet it's actually highly addictive. I know this because I'm on social media a lot, and I use a lot of Twitter, and it's very, very addictive. It gives you a very almost a false sense of achievement to see the number of likes you get and the number of retweet your tweet get, and it kind of reinforces and feeds upon itself. And I think that's what the social media platform company has figured out. It's like it's like catnips, right? Catnips for humans. This is something that get us hooked and get us addicted, get us to spend more time on social media. Yes.
Right. So given all of that, and now this is a very integral feature that they've integrated in their system to get us hooked. There are various studies that show that it does, in fact, release a dopamine once you get a like or once you get a retweet. I mean, that pleasure drug is released, and that's what keeps you hooked onto it. Now, in a hypothetical world, if all of social media platforms removed this feature, what changes would you see? Do you think that user engagement, do you think the number of people who use social media would go down?
Yeah, I definitely think that will impact the user interaction with social media, because it removes one of the crucial aspects, the very addictive aspect of social media.
So Adam, talking about this, and we also mentioned how dopamine is released while you use these platforms. Do you think Instagram is becoming more socially conscious? They want to address the mental health concerns that were surrounding their platform?
I think yes and no. I think it's so. for other people looking, it will be a beneficial step. For example, young people uploading photos will now know that their peers cannot see how popular or unpopular they are. That is definitely a good thing. However, they will still know exactly how many likes they're getting, exactly the exact metrics that they're getting. So if any insecurity that, say, a young person is still feeling in that sort of realm will still exist, perhaps to a diminished state because it's not so visible. I will also say that for, say, influencers, for young people, for people in general, they know exactly what does well and they know what does not do well. And Instagram is not fixing, say, the societal issues of, say, the objectification of women's bodies, how women putting across sexualized pictures on Instagram get more engagement than those that don't. Content that those things don't get fixed just by hiding likes. And I think if we're really going to change the game on, say, for example, mental health, then that is a much bigger issue and one that needs to be dealt with in society as well. And it can't just be solved by taking away likes.
Definitely. But why do you think they've made that distinction there, to hide likes from your followers, but you can still see the likes for yourself? Why do you think that exists? What could be the rationale behind that?
I think it's because the most content we see on Instagram isn't ourselves. It's other people's feeds. We see content that other people have uploaded, that other people are commenting on. And if we perceive that to be a much safer environment, for example, because you can't see exactly how many people have liked or have liked something, then that's going to make you feel more reassured, even if you're still getting that metric back to you. Now, these are still trials. We don't know what the full effect is what the full effect of that is going to be. So there's still some hypothesis here.
Right.
And simply put, we're going to have to wait until this becomes worldwide. If it does go worldwide, before we see the real lasting effect. I can only hypothesize here. Instagram may have some large game plan. I can only react to what I've seen so far.
Right. And hold on to that point and that thought. Carl, moving to you and talking about consciousness when it needs to come to social media and these different triggers in society, whether depression is increasing, anxiety is increasing, bullying is increasing through social media platforms. What do you think needs to be the next step to make sure that there's a tackle on this issue?
I think we have to look at the social media as a tool, right? It's not a lifestyle. Of course, it's a lot harder for young people to decide that for themselves. But I think it is a responsibility of, say, parents and guardians to give proper guidance. Get your kids out of the room, get them out in the real world, engaging with their fellow peers. Arrange some activity where they will be playing with their playmates outside, engaging with real people, because the social media is a virtual world. The game is crooked. It's designed by the social media company to get you hooked, to get you addicted, to generate this dopamine, to make you want to use it even more.
So, Carl, from what I'm gathering, you're saying that the onus lays with the parents to make sure that their children use social media in a more responsible manner. All right. Adam, I want your take on that as well. Do you think that the complete onus resides with the parents?
I think in terms of social media reflecting societal behavior, I think Dr. Carl is true. I think that is a very true statement. I think that parents should take a good responsibility in teaching their children good etiquette, and that should be reflected online. I also think that Instagram and other social media apps need to ensure that they create an environment where people can engage benevolently, can engage in a happy and friendly manner. And if they do not, that there are tools that people can use in order to adequately report and change that behavior. I think this is nominally a superficial change, but I'm actually quite hopeful that this could have some difference into how people interact with Instagram.
Right, and that's a very important point to make. Carl, on just a parting note before we end the show, now all these changes are taking place after a lot of pressure has been being put on social media platforms to act in a more responsible manner. Do you think that in the future we can expect them to have more and more of these measures coming out in which they take in mind all of what's happening around them and operate on that basis with a consciousness of sorts?
If we ourselves bring those companies to be responsible, in a way, the social media company is not that different from, say, the cigarettes company, right? They sell a very addictive product, and their goal is to get us addicted, to make us consume more. So it is our responsibility to bring those companies, to hold them responsible and to make them more responsible, to take measures to safeguard ourselves, our children, especially more younger members of the society, to shield them from otherwise might be malign influences.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Carl Zar, for joining us. Thank you, Adam Smith, for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.